Do want to point out, coming up in an hour, I know a lot of people make this the centerpiece of their day. Rush Limbaugh will be along following Fox News just to give you the fleshing out of the day. Following 1 o'clock news, Sean Hannity. Got to listen to quite a bit of Hannity yesterday, and they were focused on that situation that took place in Ferguson, Missouri, which I think most people would say has gotten completely out of hand now. Perhaps we'll have a few minutes to talk about that a little later in the show. I know we had the one woman who called in the other day, just furious, saying we were simpletons for talking about the stories that are dominating the news cycle. Funny how that happens in talk radio and news media. 7 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. And you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Online means you can hear us anywhere all over the world. 38. We have had a temperature of 38 holding steady there, really, for most of the last hour. Don't see a lot of change in that, but the sun outside right now, really bright. We're looking for temperatures getting up into that mid-60 range at some point today. 72 tomorrow, albeit we're going to see some clouds through most of the weekend. The rain that had been predicted for Sunday, at least it's not in the forecast that I looked at just about an hour ago. So the dry conditions are likely going to persist. Couple of things I wanted to talk about this hour. Obviously, if we get to Ferguson, I'll mention that a little bit later and get some of your input on what's going on there as well. But I saw this yesterday before I left the office, and no surprise. Your good friends in establishment media are doing their best to ignore setbacks for their master in the White House. This is from Newsbusters, which is an extension of the Media Research Center based in Washington, D.C. About a year and a half ago, I would say it's going to be 2 years this coming April, I did a forum with the vice president of the Media Research Center, Dan Gaynor. And the two of us sat down at this forum with two newspaper reporters. And we discussed media bias, which the reporters tried to deny, but we brought along examples, in fact, from some of their own newspapers. And by the end of the event, about 90 minutes in, they were just sitting there skulking, staring at their feet. Why don't they just admit it? It's true, it happens, we do it, we feel we have an obligation to do it, to tell people what to think, and that it's our job to advocate for certain causes and not any longer just to give you the facts. And they left that room, they were angry with us, and I don't think they'll ever do something like that again, but they were angry with us because we had basically pulled the curtain back and said, hey, look, there it is. ABC and NBC continue to ignore Obama administration's bullet ban reversal. Now, they made a big deal out of this when he first said he was going to take away the ammunition for the AR-15. They were all over this story. Well, all of a sudden, the ATF backed down over concerns that this was unconstitutional or that it was going to get them perhaps in a lot more serious trouble than they wanted to be in. Hey, let's be honest. You've got people right now who are milling their own firearms with these laser printers. I mean, it can be done. You just download the plans from the internet and off and running. And people who can make their own ammunition in their own basements or garages. So I think that that barn door was left open and that horse got out a long, long time ago. The writer of this piece is Jeffrey Meyer. He says on Wednesday, CBS This Morning was the only network morning show to cover the Obama administration's decision to drop the proposed ban on ammunition that is commonly used in the AR-15. They did that on the morning show at CBS. None of the old alphabet networks covered it during their evening newscasts. Nada, zip, nothing. And the writer says when the proposed ban first made headlines several weeks ago, CBS was the only broadcast network to offer reports on the Obama White House's latest attack on the Second Amendment. So you see, you at least had some people trying to trump that up and to play it up for their own whatever pernicious causes they had. And unfortunately, now that there was a setback, they don't want you to give the impression that Mr. Obama ever loses. And now I found this morning from the Hill newspaper in Washington. Dems push ATF to revive bullet ban. The devil is relentless. The devil is always looking for a weakness, probing constantly. If you're a fan of that TV show, Star Trek The Next Generation, they symbolize that with an enemy called the Borg. And the Borg would come and they would try to attack you, and they would just keep probing and probing until they found a weakness in your defense. And then they would exploit that. It's satanic. Now you've got the Democrat Party doing the same thing. In a draft letter first obtained by The Hill, Democrats are urging the director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to use his, quote, existing authority, unquote, to keep, quote, dangerous ammunition out of our communities, unquote. How are you going to define dangerous ammunition? Let's be honest about this. If you go target shooting, I used to target shoot a lot when I was in high school. If you go target shooting, remember the picture, by the way, of the president trap shooting? And it was quickly pointed out that the way he actually was positioned and aiming and the like, apparently it was all staged and he didn't know what he was doing, but he claimed, I do it all the time, have a wonderful time doing it. I got used to shooting on the streets of Chicago. But it was all a fraud. And yet the media didn't call attention to the fact that it was a fraud. We had to find out on certain websites online. Because, when you say pull, you're pointing up in the air, tracking your target and shooting it. You're not looking level and shooting level. I mean, and that was the point that was being made. But obviously the folks at the White House who staged that didn't know what they were doing. So you have this situation that they say dangerous ammunition. Well, yeah, any ammunition is dangerous if you use it as a projectile against somebody else. Things like that will happen. I mean, it's not unusual in any way. That's why we actually have firearms on battlefields. That's why police officers carry firearms. That's why when people go hunting, they often use firearms. Have you ever tried to bring a deer down with a rock? I don't think it works all that well. The writer goes on to say, House Democrats in their letter say they are, quote, very disappointed, unquote, that the ATF delayed the rule. I'm going to jump back here. They also use this, quote, existing authority. What are we talking about here? Existing authority. Nobody at the ATF ran for that office. Nobody at the ATF was elected by the popular will. The people who work in all of these government bureaucracies are appointed. So they don't answer to people like you and me. They answer only to the people who pay their checks. Mr. Obama in this case, and for a long time, Democrats in Congress, although now they have to answer to Republicans in Congress, and it may well be that that's why we're seeing them being a little skittish about going whole hog into this decision. There is something that is called enabling legislation, and I don't know that most people have ever heard of this. It was explained to me this way by a fellow who was a lobbyist some years ago. You have so many laws now that your legislators can't keep track of them all. And their business that comes before them, especially in states where you have part-time legislatures in many cases, they really don't have the time. I mean, they're overloaded with all of the issues and the bills that come before them in the modern age. And Congress is the same way. You know that the healthcare law, the socialized medicine law they passed in Canada back in the late 60s, early 70s, it's 18 pages long. Obamacare was 2,400? Somewhere in that neighborhood. And then, they've since, through all the executive orders, probably added hundreds of more pages to it. But they're overwhelmed in government. They simply do not have the time to track all of the laws or to retract all of the bad laws that they've passed. They don't have the time to consider all of these issues. So what they've done is they've deferred to the experts, whether that be ATF, EPA, HHS. All of these different departments come in, and it happens at the state level too. They have been given what's called plenary power. They make their own decisions. They're not elected by anybody. They create their own laws. They call them regulations. What's the difference? I guess you write a regulation with your left hand versus writing a law with your right hand, but they both have the same weight. So these people are shadow governments, and they are not democratic governments. They are not Republican governments. They are simply on their own making decisions and ordering everybody else to live by it, and you have no input in it whatsoever. And you've got to go to your legislators, whether it be on the local or on the state or on the national level, and say, look, this is not constitutional. This is not what we wanted. You're supposed to be representing us, and instead, you've turned us over to these people. And these people are operating. Here's another point to remember about all of this. We've given them the power. They now exercise it. And what they do, my dad used to say this. He worked for state government many, many years ago. He said, all right, you go in with your budget. You better make sure you spend everything. said, what do you mean? He said, well, if you didn't, they may not give it to you next year. And he said, if you can actually go a little over budget and then say, well, there's a lot more we could have done if we'd had more money, they might give you some more money. And when government says, well, what are you doing in your office to justify your existence? Well, guess what? We wrote 2,000 regulations last year. 2,000, that's a big number. All right, here's some more money. Do you need more people too? Maybe next year you can write 3,000. Yes, we'd like to write 5,000 actually. Please give us a check. So they have to perpetuate themselves, because if you don't, as a government bureaucrat, someone might say, well, gee, you're not needed. You're gone. So you see how this system is just feeding on itself. And it's the movie The Blob, where that big red thing came rolling through town. And was it David Jansen? Was that his name? He was trying to fight it. He was like the local sheriff's deputy who was out there battling it. It ate a diner or something like that. That would give it indigestion, I'm sure. But the thing came rolling through town and just swallowed up everything in the way, and you couldn't rationalize with it or reason with it. And it was just dreadful. I saw that movie when I was a very little boy. I'm trying to do this from a memory. The memory chip way in the back of my brain is getting very rusty and very old. But the fact of the matter is, these people are making these decisions because government has given them the power. Government has ceded its power, abdicated, and given the power to the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats then, through that enabling legislation, they take the plenary power and then they run with it. And then they create more regulations and more laws. Let's stop the semantics here. A regulation is a law. They create more of those to justify their own existence. And that's why we're here, and that's why the ATF is being pushed to use its existing authority. There was no ATF at the founding of this country. There was no ATF, I would believe, in 1900. So you see what we've developed here is we've developed a system that is, a shadow government that is controlling every aspect of your life. We've got about a minute before the break. I'll squeeze a caller in here. You're up next at 9:19 on Top Story. I almost said Talk Story. I've got to get this straight one of these days. Go ahead.
Yes, you was talking there about the government and the way they do things. I worked up in the state for the Idaho Transportation Department for a short period of time. And when I went to my supervisor and told him they was wasting a lot of money redoing things, not having proper help in there to do it with, all of a sudden I found a pink slip on my time card one morning. Just for that, I was doing an excellent job up until that time.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. These people, they don't like to be questioned, and they are essentially running their own fiefdoms. I mean, they are their own little kingdoms, and they can pretty well do as they please, and they don't have a lot of oversight. Thank you much for the call. Sorry to hear that happened to you. 38 at our studios. It's 9:20. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, anywhere online. President Obama, apparently, was the last night he was on Jimmy Kimmel? I don't stay up late. Obviously, I'm up early in the morning, so I don't try to. If I shifted my sleep patterns just a wee bit, I would imagine that I could get up in time to watch those shows, then make some breakfast, and then, I don't know, go to the diner or something, drink coffee until I had to come to work. But not going to quite do it that way. I try to get to bed and get up about 3 hours before showtime, and get in here. And so I don't get to see it. And somebody says, well, you should, what do they used to call it? TiVo? That's a little bit dated, isn't it? DVR it. But I don't care to watch it. Well, all I know is he made an appearance there last night, by the sounds of things, from what I'm seeing online this morning. And he talked about this situation in Ferguson, Missouri. And from what I was reading, I looked at 3 separate videos at Real Clear Politics this morning, and I didn't find any sympathetic remarks about the 2 police officers who were shot. Before I move on to that, let me just mention our good friends at Western States Bus Services, hiring part-time bus drivers right now. And they'll train you too as well. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. Also, you may have heard them this past Wednesday. They were taking some questions on air about immunizations. They are in family practice, though, and so what they do is they talk about medical issues of all different sorts. You can join us again next Wednesday morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock with my friends at Trip Family Medicine. Better health, in fact, with Trip Family Medicine, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We'll talk about some issues that may be important to you when it comes to your own health. Most people, I think, out there realize they have to take better care of themselves. Some of us say we are going to. Someday I'll do it. Someday I'll is the most crowded aisle in America. But the next Wednesday, we'll be discussing some of these issues. And we'd like you to join us as well. You can tune in each Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock for Better Health with Trip Family Medicine in Twin Falls. They are located across from the post office on Fillmore Street because life's too short not to feel good. So the president went on this nighttime talk show, comedy show, and he talked about how racist and nasty and awful the police officers in Ferguson, Missouri were. That was still his focus last night. 2 men seriously injured after they were shot by some hoodlum from the dark. And again, they may have been the nicest people on their blocks. And everything I've been reading this morning in the liberal media says, they should have expected it. They had it coming to them. Well, why did these individuals have it coming to them? Liberals would tell you when we were fighting the war in Iraq and we were dropping bombs and occasionally some innocent person got killed, liberals screamed and yelled about that. But, on the other hand, that country was being rather nasty and we had to stop them. That was the viewpoint among people on the American right. We dropped bombs on German cities in World War II and innocents supposedly died. But the idea was to hasten the end of the war and save more lives by doing that. But if you're a so-called humanist, it was wrong to do that. Well, wait a second then. Why don't you feel that way about police officers who may have never in their lives roughed anybody up for fun, but who may do their jobs completely by the book and they get shot by some hoodlum? And yet these liberals are screaming, they should have known better. This was going to happen. It certainly was. What do you think? They're not human beings? How do you not see that? Just because they put on a uniform? You look at them as somehow being less than human on the American left? Is that how that works? You talk about compassion and fairness all the time. Where is it when it comes to these 2 men? You don't have it. And the president himself, you want to talk about a cold automaton, a man who is bereft of any what you'd call human feelings. He sat there on this talk show last night and talked about the racism in that community. And as I say, there were 3 separate videos from his appearance on Real Clear Politics this morning, and at no point did I hear him say, I'm terribly sorry that these 2 police officers were shot. This is a crime of just unimaginable proportions. He didn't say it. Eric Holder made a statement yesterday saying it's wrong. But you know what? It's Eric Holder, it's Barack Obama, it's Al Sharpton, it's Jesse Jackson who caused this to happen. And another thing about this, when they had determined that the police officer involved in the shooting of Michael Brown acted in self-defense, and he followed the book, they didn't drop the investigation at that point, did they? Because it didn't fit their narrative. So they went ahead and they forced the issue. And they kept saying these are bad cops. All right, Darren Wilson must not have been a bad cop. But gee willikers, you know what? We'll find other bad cops there. Well, the other cops didn't kill that hoodlum. Darren Wilson did. He was a good cop. We now know that please don't shoot. That never happened in that situation. But they still kept pressing the issue. Well, they're racist cops. Well, you know what? There are a lot of people in America who tell jokes that might be a little tasteless. There are a lot of people in America who don't necessarily like everybody, especially someone who might spit upon them when they drive by. And the fact of the matter is, we are not forced to like anybody else. But here you go. They opened up this other investigation, released this, reported because these men had told some jokes sometimes that the left said were racist jokes. It's open season on killing police officers, or at least wounding them, or leaving them so badly mangled that they'll never be able to walk again and certainly not serve again. And government is responsible. 9:30, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 39 at our studios this morning. When I was working at my last radio station, the company president once described me as the titular head of the Tea Party on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay. And I was proud of that description. I actually had been involved in a number of different events sponsored by the 912 Patriots as well as Tea Party organizations. I was the MC at a couple of their events where we ended up having 1,400, 1,500 people turn out. Media barely paid attention. If you had those 6 old hippies playing hacky sack at an Occupy demonstration, that was front page news. In fact, I had the opportunity to be on stage with George Allen, former senator from Virginia, at one of those rallies, and I got to meet a lot of big name people who are involved in the movement, conservative movement as well as libertarian movements, and in the Tea Party. And it was just a thrilling period of time to live through. That lasted from about 2009 right up until a couple of years ago for me. I was in Washington at the really big Tea Party march in 2009. I was back at Glen Beck in 2010, and then 2 weeks later back at the next Tea Party rally. I was also there the weekend that Nancy Pelosi ramrodded Obamacare. I was with the demonstrators outside the Capitol that day. And that was another one of those days where we just felt we had to make ourselves heard. There was a conference going on in Kentucky the other day, and in the conference they had speakers who were lined up, and they were claiming that the Tea Party is filled with bald-faced racists. Now, it's funny, some of these Tea Party gatherings I used to go to, I will admit, they were overwhelmingly white. They were overwhelmingly 30 and above. But you know what? You did have people from other races, other religions who were attending, and you had people sometimes who were very young who were attending. And this was called the White Privilege Conference. It took place in Kentucky, of all places, Louisville, which is not necessarily a liberal bastion by any means. It's 9:36. Bill Colley with you, 40 right now at our studios. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can reach the program today by dialing 736-0300. That is 736-0300. We have a caller with us, and you're on the air.
Yeah, hey, remember back in 2008 when we elected Mr. Obama, and then as we went through the health care debacle, and then he sat there and grabbed a pen to write each letter with that look on his face, you said to yourself, how in the hell have we even gotten into this position? So you say, well, somebody needs to stand up. Somebody needs to come forward. We got to have some leaders who care. And, you stop and think about whether or not we agree totally with these men, but we've got Rubio and then Cotton from Arkansas, who's going to be a great person, I think. Cruz. Rand Paul may not be as strong as some people would like, but think of all the things that we have gotten, the stars in the conservative movement that are so thick and prevalent. So thank God, because see, when Americans are pushed into the corner, they figure out a way in the right and proper manner to fight back, and that's what they have done. And if you look at the economy, in spite of what this administration has done, the good, hardworking people of this country and the business owners have literally just said, fine, we don't care what you do. We're going to continue to do what we've done, and you can't stop us, and we've just done it. And so we are a better country because we were challenged by this administration. It may be frustrating, but go ahead.
Well, we're challenged by this administration and the media, too, as well. I read something somewhat depressing the other day that because of our corporate tax structure, that we're still seeing a great many companies leaving the United States that say they would stay otherwise if the structure wasn't so onerous.
Right. Hey, one more thing quickly, and then I'm going to hang up. As I was looking last night on the news, there was a sign, and it said, Black Lives Matter. And this is what, the Al Sharpton, Black Lives Matter. Well, let me give you a little, I'm sure you know these, but let's just refresh our memories. In 2013, white policemen killed black people 193 times. Black policemen killed white people 291 times. And in the streets of this nation, probably in Washington, Chicago, and elsewhere where they have gun bans, wherever it was, black people killed black people 2,447 times.
Yeah.
This is black people don't care about their own lives as much as we do, even though that may sound terrible.
And a lot of young black men in the inner cities, the odds that they'll live to be 30 are pretty small, and the odds that they're going to die at the hands of another black man are quite high. And those are numbers, thank you for the call, numbers that are rarely ever given to us. He mentioned the number of Republicans who are possibly Republican presidential candidates. And because of all the big news on the Democrat side this week where they claim they don't have a bench, if you look at the number of Republican possibilities, if nothing else, the Republican possibilities right now are reminiscent either of the 62 Yankees or the 1977 Montreal Canadiens. In other words, almost like an all-star team. And he mentioned Rand Paul. Paul may not be everybody's cup of tea, but Paul is simply just saying, you know what? This far in debt, we can't afford all of this stuff. That's a message maybe people don't want to hear, but it's the truth, isn't it? We've got more coming up. Speaking of everyone trying to call everyone else a racist in America any longer, there's an effort now to reinstate those students at Oklahoma who were suspended because of a video that might have been considered offensive. More details. This topic of race in America had been pretty well, I would think, we hadn't really heard much about it over the last 30 years, and that really changed with the election of the president because all of his supporters said any criticism of him, whether it was warranted or not, was racist. You know, they're just trying to shut down any conversation or any debate. It's a rather scurrilous approach, but it's worked for them, apparently. That's why they keep going back to it. Since they've got nothing else, I guess. I happened to see this morning. Civilrights.org. The Oklahoma frat song was racist, but was still free speech. That comes from the Daily Caller. Apparently, the president of the University of Oklahoma, who decided to suspend these students and shut down the fraternity, even according to campus rules about free speech, a lot of these colleges any longer, because of their speech codes, are discovering, and rather rudely or quickly, they're discovering at some point that their speech codes are unconstitutional. And even then, the speech codes are supposed to give students due process. But this didn't happen this time. He just simply went in and quickly said, "You're done. I'll give you 3 days to appeal." And so he doesn't give them a long time to appeal. But according to a lot of the people who are being quoted in stories across the country about this issue, you may not like what these young men did, but they have a right to do it. And writer says, according to Robert Shibley, who was the executive director of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, the university president actually lacks the power to punish the students, at least on the basis of the video alone. So there you have that. Shibley also said that OU is a state university, and that is, it's not private. If it was private, it might have some decisions it could make that we couldn't question. But because it's a state university, must observe First Amendment protections of speech. Existing court precedent, he said, protects even violently racist speech. So these young men may be getting back into school. Their fraternity may be reopened. My guess is they'll be a lot quieter afterward, which is probably not, it's a good lesson for them. They learned something from that. And you would hope that they'll turn around and actually be more productive once they actually get back into that frat house. But then again, they're 20 years old. It's a frat house, and I've been there. 946, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com, where you can hear us anywhere around the world, 40 at our studios. And you're up next. You're on the air.
Yeah, I think the double standard is just unreal. I don't listen to rap music because of most of the lyrics. Some of it's good, but most of it is just horrible. Nobody says anything about it. They make a lot of money off of it. And they can use every derogatory name in the book in their songs, and it's okay. But as soon as somebody else does it, then it's a problem. And that is just, so if these kids are getting suspended for this, then rap music should be banned from the campus.
I heard that Limbaugh said yesterday on air that if you had taken the comments of those students and set it to rap music and one of the rap stars had sang it, it would have been pretty much par for the course.
Yeah, and it's true, So how come we keep getting this double standard? Equality means everybody's treated the same. So if a white guy can't use the N word, neither can a black guy. That's equal.
Even Al Sharpton has said that's the one area that he tends to agree with conservatives is that they should drop the use of that altogether because it makes it difficult for him to whip up the passions on his side when he's got to defend them for doing the same thing.
Well, but then again, here you go. You just mentioned somebody that uses that kind of language, and it's okay when he does, but not okay when somebody else does.
Yeah.
So again, we're back to that: do as I say, not as I do.
Great point. Thank you much for the telephone call. 948. And the thing is, the liberals will sit there and say, well, but it's different. Those people can say this because. No, they can't. The liberals is what? They're an oppressed minority, so therefore that's different. Well, why is it different? Where is this hard rule written down that it's different? Well, it's because we liberals say it's the rule. Well, wait a minute. You're not in charge of rulemaking. Yes, we are. No, you're not. God and certain legislators are. Well, what God are you talking about? See, that's where you're going to go with an argument with one of the lefties on this. It's just not going to go very far with all of those people at all. Mike Huckabee is going to be along in just about a minute. The governor with the Huckabee Report, brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. 736-6563, that number again, 736-6563. Mr. Huckabee, or the Reverend Huckabee, or the Governor Huckabee, he just got back from a trip to Israel. He does this 2 or 3 times a year where he takes people on tours over there, and they visit various sites around the Holy Land, and he's a very close friend of the Prime Minister of Israel. I was reading in the Jerusalem Post yesterday that the Israeli election next week could actually result in the dismissal of Prime Minister Netanyahu, which I think would be a great tragedy at this time in history. But here's something to consider. While all of the lefties were screaming about him coming here and speaking and claiming that was just being done to promote his electoral chances, did you know that there have been operatives of the White House, that is, assistants who worked in past campaigns for President Obama? They've been in that part of the world campaigning for Mr. Netanyahu's opponent for a few months now. Your media here at home isn't telling you about that now, is it? And a thank you to Governor Huckabee, and just a reminder that the Huckabee Report is brought to you exclusively Monday through Friday by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number 736-6563. Before we wrap up for the week, and I do hope to be back here on Monday morning, and unless there's something drastic that comes crashing down to my universe, hope to be back here, God willing, and the creek don't rise, Monday at 8 o'clock. But I just wanted to share with you something that we didn't get to earlier, and I briefly referenced it at the start of the show, and I think it's worth mentioning one more time. 9:55:41 at our studios. You're listening to Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com. Online, you can hear us anywhere, all over the world. I referenced this: driverless cars are one step closer to joining Idaho citizens on the roads. This from the Associated Press. By a 1-vote margin, the Idaho Senate, that's a pretty narrow vote, passed a bill allowing companies to test self-driving cars in Idaho. The bill also sets some regulations and guidelines aiming to improve safety. I'm actually looking forward to this. I would volunteer to be the guinea pig who just gets to sit in the car and look out the window as it drives down the road. I would imagine that would be a heck of a lot of fun. And you sit there and maybe have a hot cup of soup or a cup of coffee, pull out a newspaper, read through that, a laptop, do some work on that, all while the car is just cruising along. If we get to the day, and there's always going to be, I guess, issues of computer and mechanical failure, just because of, things get old and they rust. But if we get to the day, there had been some thought about smart cars 20 years ago. And the argument was what they would do is they'd have to put down little electronic connection points all along highways. Like we don't have enough money right now to spend on highways. They wanted to do this, but they said that the automobile of the future would be able to then respond and to the directions coming from all of these nodules along the road. And all you'd have to do was, jump in, sit there, and the car would take you wherever you're going. Well, now we're beyond that. These smart cars that are being developed have the the ability. They're not going to need all of that extra infrastructure along the highways. We've gotten to the point where these automobiles are pretty much, because of global positioning and some other aspects that they'll have, and the computerization, we're going to be able to do it without all of that extra infrastructure. So you could eventually, maybe in 5 years, buy one of these automobiles. And then Elon Musk, who's the fellow who's developing an electric car, says that in California, he's going to build a giant pneumatic tube. And he is going to sit people in these little shuttle cars. They will not have to drive them. And then he is going to fire them from one spot to another. You've seen these. I worked in a building years ago where when you went to the elevator, right by the elevator, they had a pneumatic tube. And what you could do is you could send various paperwork, and you put it like your bank does. Your bank does it when you do the drive-through. You put your check in there, you put it in the tube, it fires through the pneumatic tube, and then they fire it back to you with your receipt or any change that you wanted back. But he is claiming that that is going to be the modern method of travel. So even beyond the cars that drive themselves, we might just go down to the tube in the morning, climb into a little shuttle car, and it could shoot us at incredible speeds. Now, you might have some issues with that if you don't like that sort of thing. Me, I think I'd be perfectly happy being shuttled along at several hundred miles per hour. Well, at least at my current age. Talk to me in 10 years, I'm not so sure about that. They better give you a little sand shovel, too, just in case of emergencies. Well, you wouldn't want to get to the other end and go to your meeting and, well, never mind. Rush Limbaugh coming up, following news at 10 o'clock from Fox. Sean Hannity scheduled after news from Fox at 1 o'clock, and Glenn Beck scheduled this afternoon following news from Fox at 4 o'clock. Bill Colley with you this morning. Thanks for joining me on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com. Have a great weekend, everyone.